My name is Hannah Mathis.
And I'm Scotty Carroll.
And today we are going to be letting y'all get to know us a little better, get to know Innerfire Ministries some more, explain what this podcast is all about. And today I'm going to be interviewing my dad. And in this podcast and in future ones, they're going to mostly be formatted in the interview style. We've got several really great guests lined up, but we thought we would start with the source of it all today. Okay, let's start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are.
I am a lot of different things. First and foremost, I'm a follower of Christ. I hope that comes through in all the other roles that I have. That is my goal personally, as part of, we'll talk about it in a minute, but as part of why I even started Innerfire is because I felt the need to integrate faith into all those different roles. Now, for my different roles, I'm a husband, been married for 28 years, thankful for Jonna and her contribution to my life. Certainly couldn't do it without her. I am a father. Also, Hannah is my oldest. I have two boys that are just under her. So that's a role I play. Also, I've been a pastor, a preacher, minister, not currently serving in that role, but have been involved in ministry since Jonna, actually before we were married, so nearly 30 years in ministry of various forms. I'm also an engineer. I have a degree in engineering. I have an engineering company that we've had for about 11 years. We do engineering and technical services work all over the country, have about 60 employees. So that's another thing that I do. I'm also a farmer. I have a farm. I don't actively farm. I like to say that I'm a farmer, but we do have a farm and we love to get out on the farm and do things. I'm not, out growing acres and acres of corn every day. But just some of my hobbies and things, I love the outdoors. That's part of why I love the farm. I'm an outdoor enthusiast. I like to hunt. I like to fish. I like to get out and hike. That's one of John and our favorite activities is to hike. We really like to go to the Smoky Mountains and hike those trails. And since we are living in Tennessee, but hiking anywhere, we just love to do those kind of things. So what did I miss? Did I miss anything?
I think that's mostly it.
Outside of that, I've got nothing else.
Why did you start Innerfire Ministries?
Well, maybe the better question is why don't we restart it? We restarted in January of 20, and you were there for that. But the Innerfire had been around for a long time. The reason we relaunched it is John and I had always, Jonna being my wife, we had always been in ministry, and we just saw a need. And what I saw was twofold. I saw a lot of people that were going to church, and once they left church and went about their regular workaday world where they were going to work and doing hobbies and those kind of things, it seemed to me that their faith was not being translated into those areas of their life. And I say that because of this, and this may be more than you're looking for, but the reason I say that is, I am a business owner. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later, but, I'm out in the business world a lot, and many times I would meet people, maybe work on a job with them or for them, just have an association with them in some form or fashion, interact with them several times, and then eventually it would come up that, hey, I hold this position at my church, or I teach Sunday school, or, this is the church I go to. And when they would say that, there would be a little bit of a shock to my system, because up until they said that, I would not have known they were going to church. I would not have known that they were a person of faith based on their other words and actions that I saw up to that point. And so oftentimes that shocked me. It made me ask the question, number one, do people see that in me? When I interact with other people, do they immediately know Scotty is a person of faith? There's something more to him than just the physical. So it made me question that in my own self and question it in other people and wonder, are we really integrating our faith into all areas of our life so that that's evident to people? So that's been on my mind for years, and in recent times it just was brought more to the forefront.
And I would just throw in there, I had something come to mind. I went to Union University, and which for those of you who don't know, it's a Southern Baptist Christian college. It's a great school, but I remember my freshman year, going in with all these expectations and similarly experiencing that kind of shock of realizing that everyone does not take their faith as seriously as I thought. People who, label themselves Christians are going to a Christian college. I remember particularly, I went through, at least partially, like the sorority rush, and this is no throw off on Greek life at all. My husband was involved in Greek life, but I didn't end up taking part in that because I was just really amazed at the lack of character that I saw at a renowned Christian college. And you go in chapel, at least 50% of the people are on their phones, and it was like, wow, there's a disconnect here.
Absolutely. And just for clarification of the things that I'm talking about, when I would meet somebody in the workplace, or even maybe at some of your extracurricular activities when I was with y'all as kids, the things that I'm...
He's my dad, by the way.
Yeah, we were going to get to that later, but it kind of came up now. The things that cue me in are the subjects that people want to talk about, the language that they use, how they talk about their spouse, how they talk about other people in disparaging ways, the activities that they say they participate in. All those things are the things that I look for as clues when I meet somebody about their engagement with their faith and how their faith is impacting their lives. And so when I get a negative reading on all of those things, and then the person out of the blue says, "Oh yeah, I lead the music at my church on Sundays," I just get taken back by that, and that's what made me question that integration of faith. So, getting back to the original question of what made us relaunch Innerfire, we wanted people that desired to integrate their faith to be able to have a place where they could come and get some help, support, resources for doing that. Because, me again, being out in the world as a Christian, even as a minister, and me trying to confront those things that I saw in the workplace in a real way so that my faith was not only apparent but helpful, is challenging. I mean, let's just be honest about it. It's not an easy thing to do. So we want to help people do that. We want to help people go deeper in their faith. So that was the first thing. The second thing that I saw was that your generation, Hannah, was facing a whole new set of challenges that my generation never had to face. And quite honestly, I saw us losing a lot of your generation. I mean, you just wrote an article about it, but people your age have fled the church. And they not only have fled the church, but they've fled the faith, right? And so this was, as my kids got to that age where they left the nest, left that little Christian bubble that we had created in our home, and went out to confront the real world, I saw what you were facing. I saw what you were facing at a Christian university. I saw what Andrew, with a totally different Christian university, facing the same issues. And, Jacob, who did not finish school but decided to start his career, when he went into the workforce at his age and dealing with his peers, saw a lot of the same things, just things that, quite honestly, I don't think I did a good enough job of preparing y'all for. Even though I think we did lay a good foundation for you, I think we could have done better. And so I looked at you, I looked at the generation as a whole, and I said, we've got to do something. We have got to get more proactive in laying that foundation so that when the kids do leave the little Christian bubble that we too often create for them, that they will be prepared to deal with it. And, the other thing that plays into that, if I want to kind of compare and contrast my upbringing to your upbringing, I was brought up when there was no such thing as the internet. We didn't have a computer at home. Matter of fact, I went to college and I didn't have a computer. I didn't have a computer until I graduated college and actually went on active duty in the Air Force. And so your generation has grown up with an iPhone and an iPad in their hands, instant access to tons of information, the internet, all that. And so when I was growing up, I didn't really question the worldview that was laid out for me because I simply didn't have access to other viewpoints for the most part. I went to school and studied history and some of the things that had happened, but really being confronted with it in a real in-your-face way where you have to deal with this, I didn't really have to deal with that until I went to college, right? Now our kids are on the internet at a very early age. I see it all the time where kids, even 3 and 4 years old, have an iPad in their hand, and I'm sure their parents are limiting them in some way, but very early you get on the internet and you get all this access to these contrary views. And so you're having to deal with, kids in today's generation are having to deal with worldviews that challenge the Christian worldview at an earlier and earlier age. Therefore, I think it's very important that as parents, we discuss that, we discuss how to handle that, we discuss how to combat that, and that's part of what we're trying to do, is to give people the tools to have those conversations and to confront those issues and just give them support because it's difficult.
And that's not to say that, we are fearful of other worldviews or want to shelter kids from these things. We're actually saying the opposite. We want to equip families to feel confident in engaging with their kids and talking about these things. And just to harken back to what we were saying earlier about some of the problems we saw, I just want to clarify, it's not to say that we think we're the ones who have all the answers and we're here to fix everything. We're just saying we've seen these issues and they're issues that we've struggled with as well, and that we want to hopefully come alongside people and seek truth, seek answers together, and talk about some of these problems that we see. So.
Absolutely. And also I just want to clarify, you went to Union University, Andrew's down at Lee University. We're not throwing off on those institutions. We're speaking about the people that you come into contact with at those institutions. I think both of those are fine institutions and we support both of them. We tend to forget that institutions are made up of people, right? We forget that churches, we speak institutionally, but our institutions are made up of people. Yeah. And those people are making the decisions and those people are living out a certain life inside of those institutions, and that becomes the institution. So we really need to deal at the individual level, not the institutional level. Even at the governmental level, our government is, made up of the American people. I mean, the American people enable our government. And so if we want a better government, we need to be a better people.
So we've talked about the purpose of Innerfire Ministries, why it exists. How does this podcast play into that mission? Innerfire,
as we have discussed, we're big on having conversations, right? And not just any conversations, but spiritual conversations. Conversations that are meaningful, that tackle difficult subjects. And so we have those conversations with our families. We want to encourage others to do that. We thought by having the podcast, we could bring on people that we see integrating their faith into their lives and talk to them about how they're doing that. What are the challenges that they're seeing? How have they overcome those challenges? What have been the failures? What have been the successes? I think there's a lot of very interesting people out there that are doing this, that are struggling with this, and we just want to bring them on and have a conversation with them about it. We think by doing that, we'll find some common ground. I've said for years that one of the tricks of the enemy, our spiritual enemy, the devil, is to try to isolate us and think we're the only one dealing with a particular problem. And when in fact, most of us are all dealing with almost the same problems. And so if we bring on some guests and have these conversations, I think it'll just be helpful and hopefully create a broader conversation about these topics that, can get some traction in our institutions, throughout this nation.
Yeah, I think what we would like to do is hopefully draw on the wisdom from the experiences of many different people. Unfortunately, we all can't experience everything, but we can talk to people who have had, a diversity of experiences, a diversity of lifestyles, and we hope to also show that, Christianity is not this one-dimensional thing. People have lots of different jobs, different ways that they express their faith, and we want to celebrate that with this podcast. So,
yeah, and you make a good point there, Hannah. Thankfully, through the years, we have had the opportunity to go into a lot of different churches, a lot of different denominations, churches that are set in a rural community, those in the large city. I've also had interactions with people from all different faiths. Mm-hmm. And what I have found is that there's a lot of common ground between those faiths. There are a lot of
you mean denominations?
Yeah, denominations, not faith, but amongst those denominations, there's a lot of common ground where people are trying to serve God well, trying to live out their faith well, and too often we focus on our differences rather than what we have in common. And I just think we can learn a lot from one another. And I think if we're going to make a larger cultural impact, we're going to have to forget some of our barriers at times, forget Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal, Episcopalian, all those different things, and realize we've got something in common that we need to come together on so that we can have a larger impact.
I think I almost view it as a sort of mentorship type thing, in a very small way, because the Bible talks about many times, in Titus, older women teach the younger women. It talks about that quite a bit, especially in the New Testament, and hopefully through that we can bring some, not old, but experienced, mature Christians.
We're going to bring a bunch of old people on here.
Onto the podcast, men and women alike, that we can all learn from. Let's talk about issues facing the church today. What issues do you see specifically, particularly for Christian families?
When I look at the church, the biggest issue I see right now is that the culture the church is set in has so dramatically changed over the last 20 years. Is that if we are going to confront that culture and prepare our kids to deal with it, then we're going to have to shift what we're doing a little bit. There was a time when there was a kind of a homogeneous thought process and worldview in the church. And more or less we got together, a couple times a week and just confirmed what everybody already knew, right? And unfortunately, it became a little rote, I think, sometimes, and because there was an assumption that we all view the world the same way. And now, with the culture shifting under our feet, we realize there are a lot of different views out there. Mm-hmm. And if we don't come to terms with addressing those things in a real, meaningful way, and asking the hard questions inside the church, and teaching our young people, and even not just our young people, teaching all Christians how to confront these things, then we're going to fail as a church. Okay, that's a fear of mine. Is just the church just becoming more irrelevant. And I mean, unfortunately, I have to say today, the church has lost so much impact. There was a time when the church said something, the culture listened. I don't think we're there now. Yeah. And so we've got a lot of work to do to regain a lot of lost ground. Mm-hmm. So that's one issue. Along with that is just the information overload that comes along with today's culture. And by that, I just mean there's so many different views that we can't just assume that everybody shares our views. And so we need to be a little bit more proactive as a church in confronting those other views directly. I think sometimes we're fearful of talking about, how Muslims are different than Christians, why we should care. We're not willing to address things like, meditation and spirituality outside of Christianity, and having an open and honest conversation about those things. I think sometimes as a parent or even as a church leader, we're a little scared to go there because we're afraid we're going to be backed in a corner. We're afraid we're not going to have the answer. And so we've got to overcome those fears, and we've got to get equipped to have those conversations, and hopefully that's what we can accomplish somewhat with Innerfire.
I'd say in the church today, an increasing divide, not to be too controversial, but our political differences as well. I feel like 20 or 30 years ago, the church was probably mostly red, mostly Republican. Mm-hmm. And, with that access to the internet and all sorts of factors, it's not a simple thing. But a lot of young Christians are, maybe starting to lean to the left a little more. And that's caused some huge friction in the church that I think freaks a lot of people out.
Well, it absolutely does. And, we need to be honest with ourselves and just say, if someone brings up an honest question about a difficult topic like abortion, for too long, we've not wanted to have a conversation about it. We just want to say it's wrong. That's the end of the story. Forget about it, right? And although, we can sit back and say, my belief is it is wrong, and that's all I really need to say about it. We've got to hear the concerns. If there's a young person in our church that's struggling with that issue, or that has questions about that issue, we need to be able to sit down and address those questions honestly and completely in an open way. If young people don't feel like they can bring those difficult questions, if they're just going to be cut off at the knees and sent on their way, then they're just going to stop coming. And eventually that can lead to them leaving the faith completely. So we've got to do that.
I feel like abortion, while certainly there may be people who have questions about it, is one of the more straightforward ones. Some of the more messy ones to me would be, questions about what's a Christian view of immigration? Mm-hmm. How do we deal with race issues? Socialism. There's a lot of things that are more gray areas that have unfortunately, caused somewhat of a generational divide. So hopefully Innerfire, through being willing to talk through some of these things, can maybe, by God's grace, alleviate a little bit of those issues, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. We hope we can do that, and maybe we can address some of those questions on some future podcasts and just have a conversation about them. Mm-hmm. One other issue that I'd like to just mention that, relative to the things that the church is having to deal with is, and this is probably may step on some toes or offend somebody, but I'm just making an observation, okay, is that it's difficult to tell where the world ends and where the church begins, okay? It used to be that there was a clear divide, okay? The world is over here, the church is over here, and we're simply not there anymore. The two have blurred together. And in my opinion, that has weakened the position of the church, because why should the world come to the church for help if the church is just like the world, right? And again, I'm talking about individuals as much as I'm talking about institutions, right? And so we need to find a way as a church to be separate, to be in the world but not to be of the world. I mean, we're not going to leave out of here, but we need to offer some solutions, some real solutions that are biblically based to these questions in a way that looks different than the world.
Yeah, and that's been something that has always been a struggle throughout history. But, as you talked about earlier, I think when you have the whole world in your pocket that you carry around with you everywhere, you're on it all the time, then that becomes an even greater challenge than it already was,
Absolutely.
So we've talked about the importance of conversations and tackling tough issues. Something that Innerfire is really passionate about is the family and family discipleship, and being willing to be open to these conversations. So for a family that wants to be more engaged in discipleship, more open to conversations, how do you recommend starting that?
As basic as it sounds, people just need to start talking. And I'm afraid that in the busy American lifestyle that too many families don't have dinner together anymore. The dinner table is a great place to start a conversation. But if families are not able to come together at dinner and just start a conversation, I mean, it's as simple as that, talking with one another, then they need to find a time to do it. If they're riding to school, they're riding to a ball game, they're going to a music lesson, they're going over to grandma's, whatever, whenever the family finds itself together, you need to turn off the radio, turn off the news, and have a conversation about what's going on in one another's lives. I'm afraid, Hannah, that we have forgotten as a family, and especially as parents, that it's our role to disciple our kids, and that is a responsibility that cannot be delegated. I'm afraid we've tried to delegate the discipling of our children to the church. We've tried to delegate it to private schools or public schools or to some other institution, and we simply cannot do it. Discipling our kids that responsibility belongs to us. And when I look at families today, I see dads teaching their kids how to play basketball. I see them involved in all kinds of extracurricular activities, and we've got this mindset with those extracurricular activities that we've got to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, right? I mean, we've got to be as involved as everybody else is. And somewhere in the mix there, that we forget that we need to spend more time teaching our children about spiritual issues than we do about sports, than we do about music, than we do about history. Just name a subject that occupies our time. Certainly we need to be more engaged in spiritual issues than we are just having fun and doing recreation, right? So we need to recognize that, and then parents need to start having those conversations. Once you're having basic conversations, then we can move on to harder subjects. We can integrate the reading of the Word daily with our families. And some people may say, well, that's where you need to start. And I can make that argument, but I guess my position is, if you're not able to just sit down and have a conversation about the day in a more than a surface level way, picking up the Bible and reading it might not be the best place to start. You got to develop that relationship to be able to talk before you get into more difficult subjects.
And just to clarify, it feels like there's a lot of clarifications happening on this podcast, but I just want to say, we are not opposed to being engaged in lots of extracurriculars. I think more the point we want to emphasize is, are you measuring the quote-unquote success of your child by their success in sports, their GPA? How many clubs are they involved in? Is that how you're measuring your child's overall well-being, or, are you paying attention to their spiritual lives at all? Because we know that at the end of the day, in eternity, the Lord isn't going to care, how good were they at football. It's what were they doing for Christ, and, how were they following Christ. So,
well, if I could just interject one thing there, Hannah, you mentioned us gauging the success of our kids by those things. I think by extension, what we're really doing is gauging our own success as a parent.
Yeah.
Right? If our kids are a great athlete or a great musician or have a great GPA, somehow or another we project that back onto ourselves and say, "Oh, I've been a successful parent." So we really need to reevaluate.
Yeah, that's a very, very modern American way of looking at things.
Absolutely. So we need to reevaluate our standard of success. And at the top of that list should be, have I laid a spiritual foundation for my child? And do they understand it? Have they grasped onto that? And are we producing? We can't save our kids. We can only lay that foundation. Salvation is a work of God. But we can lay that foundation for them, and that certainly should be what we're looking at as a measure of, are we succeeding as a parent?
And something else I would say, just to clear up any confusion, when we say talking, I'm sure everyone on this podcast hopefully talks to their family. If you don't talk at all, there's a deeper issue there. But when we are talking about these conversations, we don't mean where are we eating lunch, how did the Titans play yesterday, what's going on at school. We mean talking about spiritual things. What have you been learning in the Word? What has God been teaching you? What are you struggling with right now? How are your friendships? These are the real things of life that we see a lot of families, for whatever reason, not engaging in. So that's something that we would love to see change.
And Hannah, I think just in a broader sense, especially when I was pastoring, I thought to myself, we're going to church, we're gathering together to be encouraged in our faith, to learn about God, to be uplifted so that we can go out into the world and live out our faith. And we would come into church and we would talk about what the weather was doing. As you mentioned, how's our favorite sports team doing? What's going on with the kids? Where'd you go on vacation? And it was so rare. I mean, it's sad to say, but it was so rare for somebody to come in and say, "Tell me what God's doing in your life. What has God challenged you with out of the Word this week?"
People are scared to say that, which is ridiculous, but it's true.
Yeah, I mean, those are the kind of conversations that we should be having at church. Those should translate into our families, and then that should equip and enable us to go out into the real world and have those same kind of conversations. So hopefully that's what this podcast can help develop, and what Innerfire as a ministry can help develop and support.
I think, if Christians aren't talking to one another about their spiritual lives, how on earth do we ever think that we are going to be able to talk to lost people about what God is doing in our lives if we can't talk to other Christians about it?
That's a huge point, Hannah, because, again, I've been in church all my life. From the time I can remember up until now, there is a fear of people sharing their faith. Very few people ever lead someone to Christ. And I'll tell this story just because it struck me. This was just recently this happened. I was talking to a pastor, and he was telling us about something they were doing to evangelize. And while they were out, they were talking to different people and trying to engage them in a faith conversation. Well, there was a person who was on staff at the church. This was actually the staff of the church doing the evangelism, okay? So they were out in the community doing this evangelism. the somebody that a staff member was talking to began to show interest in salvation. And so the staff member basically hollers down for the pastor, "Hey, get down here." Which it was comical on one hand, but sad on another hand, in that we've got a staff member of the church wanting the pastor to have to be there to lead this person to faith, to salvation, where certainly that staff member should have been totally 100% comfortable in sharing the gospel and leading that person to Christ. And so if we have staff members in our churches that are not comfortable doing that, then what would we expect from the lay people, right? And, so again, if we can't have spiritual conversations amongst ourselves as believers, how in the world are we going to go out and confront non-believers and have those same conversations? So very good point.
I feel like the church is, we've talked about this before, we become so insular, without meaning to. And it's so easy, like, I know I'm so guilty of this, to lose any focus at all on sharing the gospel with the lost, because we just get so focused on what's going on with me in my own spiritual life, what's going on at my church, and we forget about the millions of lost people around us. Actually, in my church, just recently, a young man whom my Sunday school teacher had been praying for years, who was very skeptical about faith, actually came to Christ in a pretty miraculous way. And it was just so encouraging to our whole Sunday school class. And something my teacher said is, we just don't see this happen very often.
Right.
When's the last time that you saw a lost person, just miraculously come to faith in this way that we can rejoice over? It's just so uncommon, unfortunately, and I feel like a lot of that is on us.
Absolutely. It shouldn't be uncommon, but it is, and we need to get back there. And that's how, when things like that happen, we begin to see the church having an impact. When those things are not happening, the church is not having an impact. And so hopefully we can help with that. We're not here to condemn anybody. We're not here to put the church or anybody else down. We're here to try to be real about problems, all right, to call out a problem when there is a problem, but we're more interested in solutions and how we can bind together and help to solve these than we are about naming problems, right? So we hope that comes across. We hope you see our heart in that, and we hope moving forward we're able to be a change agent and a catalyst for bringing about some of those solutions.
Definitely. So let's transition a little bit into some stuff that we've maybe alluded to, of just how it seems like, especially in this time, everything is changing rapidly in the church and the younger generation in America as a whole. In the past year, we have seen extremely tumultuous times. Everybody knows the things that have been happening. And many people are frightened of what is happening in the world, what's happening in America, wondering, is this the end of the republic as we know it? So what would you say to people who are, frightened about what the future could hold?
Well, I do believe that everyone recognizes that America, in general, the United States of America, is in a difficult spot. We have seen a lot of changes that for the Christian does bring about fear, right? And, if I just look out across the landscape, my natural instinct is to say, you need to be scared. You need to be, there's some things coming down the pipe that are going to be different than anything we've had to deal with. I think there's a very real chance of persecution. I think there's a very real chance of people being put in jail for speaking out against certain viewpoints. We're already seeing efforts to silence the church and to silence opposing viewpoints. And so the tendency is to say, hey, we better, it might be a good time to be scared, but God is not the author of, He has not given us a spirit of fear. He has given us a rock to stand on, right? Being Jesus Christ, and that's what we need to think about. That's where we need to place our hope, is in Christ. You and I were talking earlier before we got on the podcast about the fact that it seems that America has been so stable for so long that many people have really put their faith in America to provide a stable platform for life, to have prosperity economically, to have peace and tranquility on our shores. And when that seems to be in question and could be taken away from us, that is really disturbing and really rattles us. And so we have to shift our faith from America to God, where it really should have been the whole time, right? But again, we have to be honest with ourselves and say, probably for many Christians, our faith has been in America. We put a lot of emphasis on America. And I'm as patriotic as the next guy. I served in the military. I vote and participate in what's going on in the world in general as far as politics and things go. I'm not saying to disengage, but don't put our hope and our trust there. Let's trust in God first, and then work within the political system to create a platform that enables us as Christians to better live out our faith. Mm-hmm. And so, I hope people do that. People don't need to be scared. They need to put their faith in Christ and rest in that. But I will also just add this. If what we're seeing does not motivate people to do what we're talking about, and to start to really get proactive in discipling their children, engaging with their children, engaging with other members of their faith community in a real deep way, and having some hard conversations. If what we're seeing doesn't motivate people to do that, I don't know what would motivate them. Mm-hmm. We've got to stop being passive on those fronts, and we've got to get proactive and say, I've got to do these things. Hopefully these circumstances will spur us to do that.
Yeah. So, speaking of the future, what's in Innerfire's future in 2021?
Well, I can tell you some of the things that we're thinking about. Obviously the podcast is a big thing for us. We're going to continue to produce some content like articles. We want to further our tools for family engagement. We've got a couple of things that we're thinking about doing there that could be of help to the family. We also want to start looking at putting together some groups, maybe mentorship groups, or I'm not exactly sure the name we'd put on them or how they would function, but it's something that's been on our heart, is trying to get people talking outside their families in some groups that could support this effort that we're trying to do. So hopefully we'll roll some of that stuff out over the next few months.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end our podcast for today. Do you have any more closing words?
Just excited to do this. I'm so thankful you tuned in. I pray it's been something that has been thought-provoking for you. I pray that you'll come back and listen to our future podcasts. We are going to have some great guests. I think some people that you're really going to want to hear from. And so just keep looking for that next podcast. We'll be putting out that information. Sign up on our email list. We'll keep you notified when the new podcast comes out. And just follow us, Facebook, Instagram, those kind of things, so that you can keep up with what we're doing, so you don't miss this content that hopefully will help you and your family and your broader community in having spiritual conversations, integrating your faith into your life.
If you'd like to join our newsletter, like he just said, you can go to our website, which is innerfire.com. That's INNERFIRE.com. And one last other thing I would say is, if you know anyone who you look up to who is a mature Christian who has really integrated their faith into their life, and you think maybe they're a good candidate to be on this podcast, there's a contact box on our website. Send us a message or message us on social media, and we'll put that into consideration. So that's all for today. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Bye-bye.